Flourishing Unfiltered, the podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks.
We talk about the unseen journey of struggles on the path to success that people rarely talk about.
I'm Karen Smith, positive psychology practitioner and leadership coach and consultant.
And I'm Dr. Micah Nyhouse, positive psychology and self-leadership speaker and consultant.
Before we begin today, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As we share our stories today, we honour the rich tradition of storytelling that has been passed down through generations.
If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. And with that, let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we have something extra special for you. For the first time ever, we've got dual guests on the podcast. That's right, double the wisdom, double the impact, and double the fun. And honestly, I couldn't be more excited because I love the work that these two are doing. Picture this, it's 2020, 2021, Melbourne's in lockdown, and psychologist waitlists are through the roof. Enter Ben Scholl and David Berlinski, two game changers who saw a problem and thought, why wait until someone is already struggling to seek help? Instead, they took a really awesome preventative approach and they've created a way for students to access psychological tools before they hit crisis mode. David's a clinical psychologist and brings the research-backed strategies into the space, and Ben, an education expert with over a decade of experience, knows how to make it fun and engaging. Together, they've built a groundbreaking program that takes cognitive behaviour therapy, dialectical behaviour therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy and delivers it in a way to young people that they can actually relate to. So think of those things, TikTok, gaming, Snapchat, because to be honest, that's where their attention's at. Their work has already reached over 200 schools, helping students, staff and parents alike. And if that wasn't enough, they've actually recently launched Toolbox Clinic, where a team of psychologists now provide one-on-one support to kids, teens, adults and parents. So without further ado, let's dive in and hear directly from the brilliant minds behind this incredible movement. Ben Scholl, David Berlinski, welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you for having us. Thanks, Karen.
Super stoked to have you here today. And as I mentioned, you know, I've got an education background myself and I love this work. I was really excited to be able to have you guys on the show. First, maybe let's start off with a quick elevator pitch. In your minds, how do you say and what do you sell Toolbox Education as to people that have never heard it before?
Karen, I think you nailed it in the intro really nicely. I mean, what we do is we take all the tools that you learn with someone like me, a psychologist, teach it to students, staff, parents in a way that's fun, in a way that's relatable and practical, in a proactive, preventative approach.
Can I just quickly follow that up with another little question there? And hi and welcome, David and Ben. I'm so excited to have you both on the show today. I just would love to know, what are some typical examples of maybe tools or strategy, you know, for someone who's never heard about CBT, DBT, ACT, what are some of the things you guys talk about and teach to children?
Absolutely, and there are so many acronyms in this space, so it takes a while to wrap your head around it. And ACT is, you actually say ACT, but you don't say ACT, and that's, you know, it's all confusing. But in terms of the tools that we teach, I mean, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, really the foundation of that is teaching people to notice their thoughts, actually paying attention about what thoughts are coming up, and seeing if we can actually challenge some of their thoughts. The way we challenge our thoughts is by looking for evidence. How do I know that's true? How do I know that's not true? Am I making any assumptions? If my friend was going through this, how would I explain it to them? So perspective taking. And really the root of that, if we can get really good at challenging and noticing our thoughts, that can influence our behaviors and that can also influence our feelings as well. And it's that beautiful triangle, how they all relate to each other.
Amazing.
Love that. And just so that we can understand, you guys have gone through some pretty rapid growth, which is exciting, both from a business perspective, but also an impact perspective. Have you got any, I know, David, you're coming in a bit fresh off of leave here, but we've got any sort of relatively up-to-date stats on how far spread your work is?
Yeah, so we're now across Melbourne and Sydney. We launched in Sydney in 2024. We're around about 200 schools that we work with pretty consistently, and last year we worked with around about 30,000 students, which was really exciting for us, and thousands of parents. And then our Toolbox Clinic as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, but yeah, we've been able to hire 5 psychologists, and that's growing pretty rapidly.
That is absolutely incredible. And can I just quickly ask you, when you say you're working with schools and you're working with so many thousands of students, what does the work actually look like? How can I imagine it? Do you go in as consultants? Do you educate? Is there an app they download and play with?
So the way it works is actually when we first started, David and I were running the workshops together. So we would come into a school, run a 1-hour workshop for a classroom of year 7s or year 8s. And we learned 2 or 3 things pretty quickly. The first was that we couldn't do it in large groups. So we couldn't have like 200 kids in an auditorium. If you're going to talk about some of these preventive mental health tools, and like it's real, it's not a lecture. You've got to be in the room. It's got to be face-to-face live. The other thing we noticed really quickly was we started to geek out on a lot of the psych theory. So you already noticed, Dave was talking about the acronyms and all these different things, and it would just wash over kids straight away. And so we realized that the older we were getting, the further away we were getting from school age, we were not the right people to run the workshops. Actually, it was first, second, third year psychology students. And so we train up these psych students to go and run the workshops. And to come to your question, Micah, it's all about making these tools as relatable and fun for kids. Like kids they don't care about anything else. They just want to have fun, and they want to talk about things that relate to their lives. And so the moment we started to draw in metaphors that they loved around TikTok and Snapchat, the moment we started to play games, gamify the workshops, they were hooked. And it wasn't a lecture, and it wasn't boring. It was really interesting and fun and engaging.
And just to add to that, Micah, so we run a workshop. We also offer follow-up resources as well to really consolidate the learning. So we have, I don't know how many weeks, 10 weeks worth of activities resources for students to do in their homeroom to really understand and scaffold the learning we provide.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And as someone who's worked in schools for the best part of my career, it's great when you've got the workshop or you've got facilitators that come in, but it's the follow-up that makes sure that work then becomes quite embedded in practice. So I love that that's a big part of the approach that you've taken there. And what great experience and opportunity for the psych students as well as part of their studies to get some of that first-hand experience and see the impact of their work too. Speaking of impact, I think this leads in really nicely to the next question. And I know a little bit about this from our previous conversations, but I think it's really great for our audience members to hear a little bit around why you do the work that you do. It seems like it's a very clear purpose-driven piece of work, but keen to hear from your perspective, like, why did we start it all up?
I mean, it was 2020, like you said in the introduction. It was a lockdown. Everyone was struggling. It wasn't just the people that needed help. Society at large was really just struggling around that time, especially August, September. We were still in the thick of it. We still had a few months to go. And it just kind of hit us square in the face of like, what's this approach here? Why are we waiting? Like, let's actually flip the script here and make this proactive and preventative. I mean, for me personally, I was studying as well, and I was sitting in these lectures learning about CBT and DBT and ACT for the first time. And I just remember thinking, like, why am I only learning about this now? Like, what's these gatekeepers who hold the tools to personal well-being? It just blew my mind, and it should be accessible, and it can be, and that's really what we're doing here, making this as accessible as possible.
Yeah, and we love that, and I'm a big believer. This is my purpose part in the podcast, and Micah knows this, but I'm really big on ensuring that people have access to the tools that they need to help to support them to thrive in life. And your point is so right, David, in that it seems like these things are often hidden behind closed doors and not everybody gets access to it, but everyone really should. It almost should be like a universal basic human right to have access to these things. So I love that.
100% agree. What I would love to now start diving into a little bit, I mean, it sounds fantastic. You've got your purpose, you've got your why. It sounds like something that I 100% agree with is absolutely needed in this world, in every country of this world. So then walk me through this rapid success. What does that look like for you behind closed curtains in terms of, is it just all of a sudden it takes off and it's awesome and cha-ching, the money comes in and you're loving it? What are some of the struggles, if any at all, that you guys have experienced along the way, especially given that you two work together, which is something also different to most other people we've interviewed on our podcast so far?
It's funny that you use the word rapid. Like, it does not feel rapid at all when you're
Okay,
here.
interesting.
And it's, we've both got young children now, and you hear that phrase of like, the days are long, the years are short, sort of thing. It's like when you're in that struggle early on, especially, and like we're by no means out of that early phase, but yeah, it can feel really, really challenging. So I guess, you can come up with that idea and say, we should be teaching these tools to kids, but who are we to then go and say to a school, let's do this? Like, there's got to be a partnership there where a school actually has that problem that we think everyone needs our solution for, and B, believes that we're the right people to do it. And that was super daunting for us, because we went back to our old school and basically said, hey, look, here's our idea. We really want to try this, test it out. And they were, to their credit, they were so open to it. And at that stage of COVID, schools were looking for any sort of content to engage kids. Like, kids were sitting on laptops all the time, coming back to school in between lockdowns. And so we were really lucky that we just had this testing ground, this playground, or not a literal playground, but to kind of play around with the concepts and ideas and fail quickly. And so, yeah, we sort of thought of ourselves as like almost like stand-up comedians in the early days, where not that we were telling jokes or anything, that, I mean, hopefully some of it was funny, but we were constantly just bombing and like certain things not landing, and kids looking at us being like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know what this is. But very quickly you start to go, okay, that didn't work, let's try this. Or that little bit there, I saw two kids in the circle lean in. Okay, let's do a little bit more of that type of activity. And
Amazing.
we were constantly iterating and going, all right, like, let's throw that playbook out, but like, let's keep a little bit of what we've done. And then there were other little steps along the way that got us to, from one school to 2 to 4 to 10, and those little milestones along the way.
Yeah.
Sounds like a very long iterative process indeed. And I just wonder, what kept you guys going? What helped you guys to never doubt yourself and your idea so much that you maybe had given up along the way, especially given that you have young kids or babies at home, and everyone knows how hard it is to get a side hustle off the ground.
I mean, definitely times and days of questioning ourselves. Absolutely. That's just kind of part of it. But it was just, I think what really helped is early on we kind of implemented like a feedback form, like a QR code where students would fill it out. And at the beginning, it was so valuable because, you'd walk out of a session, we can only we're our biggest critics. We'd think, I mumbled that, or I muffed up that explanation here. And then you'd walk away and you'd look at the feedback and, 70, 80% really loved it. They thought it was really fun and engaging and interactive, and just that beautiful reminder to always just go, look, and this is what we tell our facilitators. It was never as bad as we thought, and it's kind of probably never as good as we thought as well. It's probably somewhere in the middle. We're our own biggest critics and judges. And if we can just take 1, 2, 3 wins out of that workshop, that's going to help us build to the next one. And 4 years later, we're still doing that. We're still going through that process.
What a beautiful, realistic approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Human
and I
approach.
love the fact too, like, you're getting feedback from the kids, because I know full well that, adults can be pretty good at giving feedback, but kids generally don't have a filter when it comes to feedback. You're getting the real, authentic, this is how I feel about it.
And they don't sugarcoat as well. Like, often it doesn't take a feedback form to tell us. And like Dave and I have both had some pretty brutal stuff like said to our faces, even when we, our fashion choices from a different era. Dave, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I'll share it quickly. I was in a classroom with year sixes. I was wearing what I thought were pretty regular jeans. This 12-year-old girl just looked me up and down and said, those jeans are too skinny. And I was like, wow. And then my initial thought was like, you don't even know how skinny jeans were once upon a time. Yeah. Not skinny. But then she looked at our facilitator who was sitting next to me, and she went, see, her pants are really cool. I was like, great. Lesson learned. Really appreciate the feedback. I'm in my 30s. That is confirmed.
Okay. And for anyone who's watching this on YouTube, David, do you want to show us your jeans today, or just keep them under the desk?
Very hot today, so sure.
Okay. Fair enough.
Very fair. Look, and it is interesting because kids would give some really great feedback, I imagine. And I imagine there's been a multitude of like really good bits of feedback that have helped really drive and energise your team of facilitators and yourself. Other than fashion-wise, have you had any feedback that's like really hit hard and made you go, ooh, am I doing the right work here? Or have you managed to be relatively unscathed?
I think there's not specific ones that kind of come to mind, but there's themes that really stick with me. And a big one is around when a kid will say, like, you or the facilitator would cringe. Like you were trying too hard, or like you were kind of telling us stuff we already knew. And I always think to those moments, especially when we're training new facilitators, to be like, get rid of that voice that we have that's presentory, or like giving a speech when you're, that speech voice that you give when you're in primary school and you're like reading and your inflection goes up at the end. Like we say to them, just talk normally, just as if you're talking to peers and friends. And so I always think of that feedback that like kind of cuts through and goes, you weren't real.
Yeah, nice. And that's probably like where I was sort of trying to head to like ask the next question around, what are the strategies that you've used either yourselves or you now pass on to your team of facilitators around when we get that feedback, how do we move past it and not let it affect the next, workshop that we're going to run? Because it's really easy to hang on to those comments. And you obviously don't want to for the sake of like the next group of people. It's not them that have made you feel that way, but it is important to move through that. So what tools, strategies or techniques do you use yourselves or with your team?
I mean, something we teach in training and then we always talk to each other is just that whole idea of starting again. Like you said, it's a new group, it's a new class. They don't know how, even if it was amazing the session before, they don't know how good it was as well. You've got to start again. You've got to win back their trust, their respect. You've got to kind of be your authentic self, and that's what kind of drives the workshop. Another thing we teach is like, it's not about having to be liked. Like we don't have to be the most popular person in the room. And again, kids are their radar on that. They will call it out very quickly if they can feel you're trying too hard. Mm-hmm. Best thing we can do, and it applies not just to workshops, relationships, friendships, these conversations. It's just like people like you if you're just yourself. They don't care if it's you're really passionate about a really specific thing. People get excited about your energy and enthusiasm, and that's what matters. Not you trying to fit into that mold or adapt to that year 10 classroom or year 12 classroom. And just that idea of staying. If you can stay true to yourself, and you don't have to be liked, but if you're there to teach them something and something that they can use for the rest of their life, you can hold that. That's going to go a long way in the workshop.
I love that so much, especially because there's always so much talk around authenticity in the workplace. It doesn't matter in what context or setting or with what type of clients or age groups, authenticity. And it's so often mistaken for not having a filter or not being able to apply a filter, which is absolute nonsense, of course. So I absolutely love that because, you know, authenticity is so important for our well-being as well. And if that's what's sort of reinforced through your context or through your environment, obviously all for it. There's also a really nice lesson, David, that you just shared with us. And that was actually going to be my next question. From everything you've experienced so far of creating this business and so forth, what are some of the lessons you might want to share with our audience?
I'll speak from the content side of things, and I'm sure Ben will have another take. But from the content side, it can be so tempting for me to sit behind my computer and really try and come up with that perfect workshop. And then only once I've perfected it, then I'm going to take it to a school and say, here, school, I have the perfect workshop. It doesn't work that way. You can always iterate. You can always, make it better. And something we learned, like Ben said earlier, is like it's actually just getting in front of a group. That's how you learn the most. We don't want, what's the saying perfectly? Perfection gets in the way. Don't let perfection get in the way of good enough or whatever that is. It's that idea. Let's just keep on building, keep on trying, keep on iterating, and that's how we'll just grow and build and get better slowly and gradually.
Can I just quickly add a follow-up question there?
Yeah.
So when do you know when is good enough?
I guess you don't. I guess maybe our answer is just always ongoing, and it's okay to always reflect. And we also don't want to be the type of people or the business that gets to a point and says, okay, our content is now good enough and it's never going to change. Like it's always evolving. We're always responding to what the students are saying. We're responding to what our facilitators are experiencing. So I would say never. Like it's just an ongoing process, but knowing that you're never going to reach that perfect destination.
I guess my question was, when do you know you're ready to actually step in front of a group? When do you know when there is the point that you now have enough to go out and actually step in front of that school or the group of students?
Well, we've sort of de-risked it in a way where we kind of do it in phases and in like a tiered approach where we'll often go to a school and say, like a school that we've worked with for a while and say, listen, we're thinking about a new idea. We've spoken to 100 schools this year that also have the same challenge with their year 4s or their year 7s, and it might be around friendships or bullying or overthinking. We've matched it up with a lot of the research and what we think the tools are. Can we test it with you? Can we trial it in like a low stakes environment with one class? And they're usually more than happy to do that because they trust us. And in that way, it's just kind of easing it in instead of going, all right, let's release it to the world and just hope to God that it works.
I really like this too because too often do I see, and many of our other guests would attest to a similar message here. People come up with a great idea and they just go from zero to hero, launch, and sort of wonder why it may not be the best version it possibly can be. And not to say that I'm a big believer in that, saying that we should be embarrassed about the first iteration of our product, and if we're not, we've launched too late. But starting with a bit of a lower stakes approach, building on the feedback, creating those continuous feedback loops. I think that's a really valuable lesson for a lot of our listeners there around start small, build up. And on that note, that's kind of what you guys have done, not just in working in the, in schools, you also now have Toolbox Clinic. So can you give us a little bit of info on that and maybe any of the challenges in going from this is what our core product / service is to now we're trying to offer something else? Was there were you able to use some of the clout from one space to move into the next, or how did that all come together?
So it got to the end of, I think, 2023, and we had built really wonderful relationships with schools. And it kind of just squared us in the face and said, we've got such a cool, unique, pipeline, really, where students and school counselors recognize us and trust us and know us. And it just made a lot of sense to go, okay, here's our workshops, here's our, breadth approach, but we always know there are many students in every classroom and staff members and parents and families that just need that extra bit of support. So that was also jumping into the deep end. I've only been a psychologist. This is my 4th year now. That was pretty scary. Who are we to run a psychology practice? I know Ben thinks, he's not even a psychologist, and suddenly now he's running this we're running this together. But it's kind of really transitioned really seamlessly. So we run a lot of parents sessions, we run a lot of staff sessions, and we just say, hey, we're here, we're around the community, we want to support you and your school communities for those that need it. And then it's also been really exciting to build it around, like, not just in the schools, like visiting all the GP clinics in the area, getting our name out there. It's been really, really exciting. And also getting some of our psychologists now to also run some of our sessions too. So having that really nice synergy is an exciting thing too.
That's brilliant. And we do know there's plenty of evidence out there that suggests that, in any given population, a sort of more blanket approach will work to a degree, but there's always going to be those people that need that additional tier of support, and it's kind of great that you're able to offer that almost in one amazing package. Was there any challenges in doing that though? Was there any I'm assuming that as far as like risk and accreditation and things like that, it's almost a different business entirely in itself, even though very complementary. But was there any challenges in that?
I mean, aside from all the logistics and the practical side of things, yeah, massive. And not to mention, and I know this is in your space and the themes that you talk about, but imposter syndrome. I think that's probably the one. We're capable, competent, can do different things within a business, but then are able to find a lease and find the accreditation, all that kind of stuff. But then at the end of the day, it's okay, who are we to do this? It's a whole different space, and also managing your time and splitting your energy and your focus and going, we're going to grow this thing over here, and they're going to complement each other. But yeah, I think some of those challenges have also been that's what's helped us grow as well. I think also in our partnership, in how we do it. It might sound a bit meta, and I guess it comes back to your point earlier, Micah, around what tools are we using? Mm-hmm. Where the tools we're getting our facilitators to teach are the ones that we're using on a daily basis with each other. And mm-hmm. I'm very lucky. I'm not a psychologist, and yet I get I get to work with, it's a cheat code. I'm working with one.
yeah, free access.
I'm learning these tools, with him. And
are you documenting Ben's journey, David? Be honest. Do you have a file running, don't you?
One big social experiment.
Yes. He's ready. Is
there any hope for Ben?
But learning, using those tools with each other. I think, you guys work together, and a lot of your audience as well, and the people you have on will have business partners. But our the foundation of our partnership is so important to how the two organizations run. If we're being aggressive or passive aggressive with each other in our communication, it's just not going to work. And we talk about overthinking, overanalyzing in our workshops with students. It's well, we're all adults, we also get those thoughts. And so we'll use a lot of those tools, hey, that conversation we had earlier, I just want to check, I was getting the thought that you were annoyed at me about this, and we'll just nip it in the bud straight away. So I think, that's how we kind of manage some of those challenges more than the practical or logistical stuff.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so good, I think, to hear. For anyone, that is the way you're sort of handling your relationship, because it does take a lot of work for any relationship. It doesn't matter whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, a business, relationship. It's so important to talk about these things, because, working with coaching clients or whatever, I find all the time people have expectations they don't communicate. People make assumptions they never challenge, let alone, challenge themselves, or a challenge by just simply asking the question to the person that is involved, So I think those skills are so incredibly important to learn for anyone, let alone, for a business context. But can I just quickly ask one more question? And that is, it's 2025 now. If you were to look back onto yourselves right at the beginning of things, are there maybe a couple of tips that you would share with your younger selves as you were just starting out that you could also share with our audience?
That's a wonderful question. What comes to my mind is that just that piece of you're gonna make so many mistakes, and that's totally part of it, and that's important. That's going to help you grow the business, but also grow as a person as well. And the hard conversations that that you're going to have with Ben, or your friends, or your partner, or your family, that's the stuff that's really going to shape you into being the person you are today.
That's awesome. How about you, Ben?
I think it would be just be okay with the failure, like the early, not just the early losses, but like the ongoing stuff, and not take it so personally. That it's going to happen and you're going to be okay.
I like that.
Awesome.
It's almost the Dory, just keep swimming, right? Excellent. I did have, and I had one last question here as well, which actually just stemmed from like hearing you both speak to these last 2 points. Would you say that either of you, or would you say that you have either established or maybe even informal sort of norms as far as like working together, or even like ways of being that might be really useful for our listeners to hone in on? Because we have got a mixture of people that are solo business owners and people maybe thinking about moving into having a partnership. It might be really awesome to hear some great insights from two people that are already doing it.
Definitely. It's interesting to put them out explicitly. Like, often they're quite implicit for us and we've never really thought about it. So this is interesting.
Can we get an example?
I've got one, Ben, while you're thinking of...
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go for it.
Yeah. I think it comes back to some of those tools, again, we teach in our workshops. I mean, going to that CBT workshop, a big part of CBT, we have unhelpful thinking styles, thinking traps that we all fall for, cognitive distortions, whatever you want to call it, and just being able to call it out and just put it into the universe and say, one of them is mind reading, one of them is fortune telling, one of them is ignoring the good, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, all of those. And actually just, Ben, I don't know how, I think it's unique, the way we speak. And it's not this cliche thing that we're, it's scripted. It's really genuine. It's like, hey, Ben, mind reading here that you thought I mumbled and stuffed up this podcast we did with Micah and Karen. And then Ben was like, not at all. That didn't happen. And this is what we teach. And suddenly I go, okay, drop of anxiety. Ben's not annoyed at me or thinking anything of me. And then we can then I'm in touch with reality here with Ben. I can actually, not this, the fancy psych word for it is projection, right? I'm not perceiving Ben as someone who's annoyed at me. I've popped that bubble and now I'm interacting with a person, my business partner, who has my best interest at heart, and we're here to collaborate and learn from each other.
Amazing.
It feeds in as well, I guess, to where I was going to take it, which was that we try to talk out loud what we're thinking more often than not. So not to assume things, or not to we try to over communicate more than under communicate, and put a lot of things out there because we know the strength of the relationship will be what drives everything else. And so if there is, an anxiety around something, we'll try to share it, whether it's about each other or about a decision or something we've done. We'll also just try to, without it becoming a therapy room, because if that could be the case if I'm working with the psychologist.
It can happen. It often happens with Micah and I. You've got two coaches working together.
I think we're both conscious of that, okay, there's a friendship here as well. It's not a professional sort of thing, but to call out what the emotion is. So to try and say, I think there's so much that's unsaid sometimes in conversations, and the other person doesn't actually know what's going on for you. An example could be Dave's got a newborn at home. not getting a lot of sleep, might have had a really rough night, it'll just be said straight away, hey, this is what's happened for me, and here's what I'm coming to this conversation with. For me, it's usually hanger. I'm normally hangry, and I'll often say to Dave, listen, if I say anything, it's probably from that point of view. That's a low level one, but the deeper emotion might be hey, listen, I'm feeling anxious about this decision we've got coming up. I just want to let you know. And it clears the path for us for him to go, okay, that's what he's sitting with right now. I've actually got a bit more clarity around this. We can level each other out, and sometimes it goes the other way. He might be really nervous or stressed about something, and I can hold a bit more of the rope for him.
Fantastic. I absolutely adore how you guys operate together. What you guys put out into this world is absolutely amazing. If people want to find out more about you, the work you guys do, can you please share every single touch point people can find? We will obviously link to that in the show notes. And just to double up my question with another one, I would also love to know what is on the horizon for you guys. If anything at all that is new, some new project, anything out there, please share that too.
So the places that people can find us so our school's business is called Toolbox Education, where we've got a website, toolboxeducation.com, all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok now for the next generation. But then our clinic as well is called Toolbox Clinic, and it's based in Bentley on Centre Road in Melbourne. And so you can search toolboxclinic.com as well as the same socials. In terms of what's on the horizon for us, and I guess the ask to the audience too, is our next frontier will probably be two things. One is around a new clinic in the next 12 to 18 months, whether that's in Melbourne or in Sydney. But we're also just starting to think about where this work could take place with not just school students or in a clinic, but in businesses and in the workplace. So if there are people out there who want to connect with us and start to share how this might help them, or if there is a need there, it's just as we did with the schools business, is tread lightly and ask questions and have conversations with people and go for coffees with people. So to see if it actually is, if there is a need. So we'd love to connect with people out there who think that some of these ideas or these workshops or these tools could help their staff or their people.
Oh, amazing. And yeah, look, as Micah mentioned, we'll happily spruik your avenues of communication loud and far as we can, at least on our end, to encourage that, because it is amazing work that you both are doing, and credit to you for leaning into your passions and then finding a way to make it into your work as well. You're doing some amazing work for staff, students and parents alike. I mean, I love the fact that we're hitting all those touch points as well with similar messages. So credit to you both. It has been awesome for us to have you both on the show. It's been an absolute hoot hearing a bit about your journey, some of the struggles, and even that last point there around your ways of working. I thought we were going to get through, Michael, without any more comments about skinny jeans, but that's all right. We're there again. That's okay. But gents, it's been brilliant. And thank you both for joining us. I know that you're incredibly busy, and David coming back and probably joining with relatively little sleep, so I can resonate with that feeling. But it's been brilliant to have you. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
All right, back in the post show again, and to our listeners, we said that we were going to bring something different to round out and get close to the end of the season here, and we have. First time we've interviewed two people at a time. I know, something different for us too, which was really great to expand the horizons a little bit, challenge ourselves a little bit, and two really amazing people doing some really great, what I would say is quite clearly purpose-driven work. And not only have they done such a great job getting one business off the ground, they've been able to branch out into another part of their business and extend their service. And if we think about service industry and people that are doing really impactful work, it's kind of cool to see what they're doing and see where they're going to continue to grow and go and how it's going to expand. It's going to be really exciting. But I really love this conversation, Michael. A lot of similar themes that we've heard from previous conversations, but just different hearing it from two people as opposed to just the one.
I know. I absolutely agree with you, Karen. And wasn't it a nice little learning curve? Who would have thought that when you interview two people at the same time, that maybe when you ask them questions, don't just, pose them into the room, but maybe ask specifically one person to answer so that you don't hear crickets. Who would have thought?
Absolutely. But we got there in the end and had a really fruitful conversation as well. There was quite a few things in this conversation that I really loved. Obviously, as an ex-educator myself, the hearing about the great work that they're doing really resonated with me, but hearing about the way that they went about it and building up and the trials and tribulations of trying something out, because I tell you what, kids are harsh critics. I said it in the episode with Ben and David, but if they don't like something, they'll let you know. And there's no padding that comes with that often. There's no chance to throw your crash helmet on. They're just going to give you the feedback.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very different from working with adults.
Yeah, I mean, I think as adults sometimes we're a bit more considerate around how something might land. Students, not always.
But also means that when you're at the receiving end, often you're left guessing, wondering, are they just beating around the bush? Are they being 100% truthful? And that can introduce, psychological unsafety, I guess, to some extent. So I don't know what's better or worse, being so direct and just at least knowing where you're standing, or...
Yeah, I love a nice balance between the two. I don't know if it exists. Maybe it does, but I think everyone would love a balance between the two when you hear the extremes, don't you think?
Yeah, probably.
Really interesting in this conversation, though. It's been a similar theme throughout many of, even this season, last season, that recurring theme of imposter syndrome popping up there again. And it didn't matter whether or not it was just as a sole business owner that we've heard with many of the other conversations, or having two people together going at it, it still seems to be present.
I know, isn't that so funny? I mean, funny, not funny, but because that's exactly what I would have thought. Often I always admire other people and I would never question their worth. In my industry where I can see that they have a certain standard and quality of work. And even though they might still be guessing themselves, or questioning their own worth, I know that when I collaborate with people like that, like yourself, for example, that I don't second guess the product or the outcome of our work so much at all because of that. So it was really interesting for me to hear that also they still have this imposter syndrome. And I guess, as you said, it's a reoccurring theme throughout almost every single episode of ours, wasn't it? And, when they said, they go out to the schools and I'm wondering, well, why would anyone listen to us? And I'm thinking, well, maybe because you're a clinical psychologist and you are an educator. Who else would we listen to?
Yeah, right? That's right. If there's going to be some experts in the field, they're going to be the closest thing at this point.
Yeah, I know. I know. And the combination too, perfect combination to co-develop a toolkit for education and mental health. Hello. Yeah. But obviously I can personally relate, imposter syndrome has been unfortunately by my side on and off throughout my career.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of in some regard, I think it's kind of good because it keeps us in check a little bit, and it keeps our quality control at the standard of work that we put out kind of remains high when it's sort of there. You have that voice in your head. We were just talking before we lent into this conversation that I'd recorded some new footage for some of my own work, and I wasn't happy with it because, you have a standard of work, and I'm like, oh, is this going to be good enough? And then, I was reassured by the person that helped me record it. They were like, no, but the content is quality. You've got to get it out there. I'm like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah. But, I guess what we want to aim for, though, is self-compassionate imposter syndrome. Because, you just said before, well, it's good to some extent because it keeps, it raises our bar. We hold ourselves accountable to a certain level of standard and stuff like that. But not to be confused with, well, imposter syndrome can feel awful. And, when we're just talking down on ourselves and just being our own worst critic and stuff like that. Because research shows that our idea that this raises our bar and our standard and makes us achieve higher and be more productive and successful and blah, blah, is actually very false. So I think, but obviously, it's all about balance, right? So maybe we should aim for self-compassionate imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. We'd love to get Kristen Neff's insights on this.
Yeah, unfortunately, she's not yet willing to come onto our show. We're just not big enough just yet.
We'll keep chipping away at that one. We'll keep chipping away at that.
Christine, if you're listening, clearly we need you.
Yeah. There's some really fascinating insights there for sure. But yeah, it was just really fascinating to hear that even with, two brilliant minds coming together, that still existed. And, I think thankfully they're working in the space where they've probably got access to a few more of the tools that help them navigate that quite well. But on that same note, it was actually very interesting to see how they use their tools in their business relationship as well. I think I referred to it a couple of times in the episode. I was trying to tease out, what are your ways of being with each other? What does this look like, as friends, then, business partners as well. And that was just so fascinating. And it was interesting when we spoke to them about it. It was kind of like there was these unwritten rules that existed between the two, and we prompted them to think about what they were. Then they had some quick fire ones, but you could see that they were thinking, oh, what else is there? What else do we do? But I really loved that part of the conversation where we were trying to go, what is it that makes you two work well together?
Absolutely. And I guess, it's that whole, again, self-regulation part of everything. Or actually, it's bigger than that. It is, when in, I think season 6 it was, when we interviewed Eric Wersing and we spoke a lot about emotional intelligence in our post-show recordings. I mean, this is exactly what it's about, right? Because they basically spoke a lot about, imposter syndrome, recognizing that, but also then challenging that and regulating themselves, also understanding that mistakes are part of the growth process. We often assume that when people are successful, that it just feels like one big success after another. And they say, no, I guess the biggest learning curve was to realize that mistakes are everywhere throughout the entire process. They're part of the growth process, and we just have to be able to deal with that and accept that as part of the journey. But obviously the other half of emotional intelligence here being how they relate with one another and co-regulate, almost sounds a bit weird, but co-regulate each other. And they spoke about their communication, even though they couldn't maybe pinpoint it so much when we first asked them, they very clearly said they absolutely over-communicate. If you think you're communicating, try again, because chances are you're barely communicating. Definitely aim to over communicate, because this helps prevent misunderstandings. And so the example they gave, right, was about the many cognitive errors, for example, we have, and that because of their background knowledge, they'd just be able to quickly say, okay, spotlight effect, just worried about something, and how they just able to just quickly put those thoughts that are often mulling away in the background onto the table, being transparent about it, and just, again, over communicating it with their partner.
And they did do a really good job explaining it in the end, and it was really lovely to see them talk about the tools and how they utilize them themselves, because you can see that they this is how passionate they are about the work. They're using it with each other to ensure that there is a really healthy relationship that they've got going there as well. And I really admire their ability to speak quite frankly with each other and call out and identify what their thoughts are. I think that's really healthy. And as they were explaining that, I was like, gosh, if more people were able to do this, and I guess this is the purpose, right? This is why they're doing what they do. They want more people to be able to do this. But just imagine if society as a whole was able to identify these thoughts or call out these thoughts, and then it would take away some of the angst and anxiety, I think, that exists in, having difficult and complex conversations with each other. Regardless of whether it's a business partnership, a friendship, or just social group coming together, whatever the context is, if we could all do this and all had this in our toolkit, imagine how much easier things would be, and imagine how much more would get done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it just speaks to the fact that they've established psychological safety within their partnership, you know, that they know it's okay. They can voice or air those thoughts, and it's okay. You know, it doesn't mean that the other person is going to be upset or feel attacked or anything. Like, they just deal with it almost like matter of fact. Oh, absolutely agree with you. Imagine if we had this ability to communicate like that, and also this level of trust in any relationship in society. Because, you know, there's so much research to show just how beneficial it is, you know, just with regard to strategic alliances or business partnerships. There's a beautiful study by Jatoba and colleagues from 2022. It's called The Role of Communication Between Partners in the Process of Strategic Alliances, and it's a systematic literature review. So again, it's a nice, good quality piece of evidence that just shows how important communication, or even over communication, is in the formation, development, and success of strategic alliances. And I guess it's one of those topics where we always say, but it's kind of intuitively obvious, isn't it? But I think we have this so often that we go, oh, you know, we had this in our chat around emotional intelligence as well, you know. But yeah, of course, emotional intelligence is like crucial to leadership, and maybe even more important than technical knowledge or something like that. But we often make assumptions like that in society, and research is conducted around that and then cannot confirm that. But in these instances, it's like, no, there's actually evidence to back those statements, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So in essentially what you're trying to say here in real simple terms is like, we tend to work better with people that there's a bit of alignment with, right? Like, I think in preparation for this little post show here, you're talking about like the notion of opposites attract. And you had a pretty strong opinion about this, but backed it up. So I think it's probably worthwhile our listeners hearing a little bit about that, because, you know, opposites attract is such a commonly thrown out there phrase, and it's almost like thrown away without thought. But do you want to share like what we were discussing just prior to in the record button?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just giving that as an example, you know, just because it's just one of those phrases that everyone says all the time, and we just assume because intuitively kind of makes sense. We think of magnets and polar opposites and blah blah whatever. It's one of those phrases you hear absolutely everywhere. Oh yeah, opposites attract. If, for example, a romantic relationship forms between two people who are just so different, it's like, oh, of course, because opposites attract. But when you actually look at the research behind that, it's like, no, it's not like that at all. Research shows that we tend to choose partners who are just like us, who are very similar to us. We don't like an opposite to us because that's just how narcissistic, I guess, we are by nature. So it's just one of those examples where we often think, you know, going back to the example of emotional intelligence, or here of, you know, over communication is so important for strategic alliances. Well, yeah, it's so nice and easy to say those things because we think they're intuitive, but is there actually evidence to back that up? So it's important to actually look at, well, is there any truth to that? I guess that was my point.
Yeah, it's a really good point as well. And I remember when you mentioned it pre our recording here, it made me go, I wonder if this is different in like collectivist cultures versus like individualist cultures, because but then I mean you kind of pulled me up a little bit on it too, because it's a bit of a tricky one, right? Because in like, you know, collectivist cultures, we generally, you know, care a bit more about others, but it also with some regard talks about like fitting the mold and fitting in and not breaking norms. So whereas in individualist cultures, you know, we generally care more about ourselves and our own wants and needs and goals and
individuality, being
exactly,
different,
and
standing out, being
we're willing to break
poppies.
the rules. So I'm a little bit unsure where I sit on that now. I mean,
well, I would say, and obviously I don't have an answer to that either, but I would say if someone's listening and they know something about this, please feel free to share, comment, you know, whether this is under the YouTube video or in our socials, or send us a message or an email. We would love to hear.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear a lot more about that too. And just for people that are maybe not aware, but like, you know, this is a big issue that exists in a lot of studies as well, that, you know, most of our research that we have access to is conducted in weird countries. And when I say weird, I don't mean that they're like actually a little bit strange. It's an acronym here now. So we've got Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Yeah, very good.
Yes. So most of our research that we generally have access to comes from countries which have, all of those attributes. So, we're still at that point in time now where we're trying to understand what does this look like globally when we're conducting studies, which has prompted that thought just there. So,
very important point you're making there.
Yeah, I think we're wrapping up this episode without. We're probably having more questions to ponder, but maybe it's a good, it's a good point for us, our listeners, just to be across the fact that often when we're referencing a lot of research, there's probably still a lot of interpretation that needs to be done and exploration as well.
Lots of
and
caveats.
More longitudinal studies. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless. Some great thoughts, some great thinking happening in this space as always, Micah. We've wrapped up now episode 9, which is pretty exciting. 1 episode to go. Pretty big name. I don't know that we're going to name drop here just yet, but really exciting final interview to finish up with.
Yeah.
And again, a different perspective altogether to today's conversation and many of the others that we've had before. But
should I share that maybe at least maybe we can share that she's got 1.6 or 1.7 million followers on Instagram?
Yeah. A couple more than me. Very impressive.
Slightly.
Very impressive. Yeah.
And she's such a beautiful soul. Anyway, cannot wait to air the next episode either.
Yeah, lovely soul and a really great conversation to round out our season. So for our listeners that have stayed with us throughout the season, we appreciate you. I hope that you're learning lots along the way, just as we are. Each conversation brings some new insights for us, and we hope that that's doing the same for you. With 1 episode to go, hang in there with us, stay with us. We promise you that you'll really enjoy this final conversation. But for now, take care, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to today's show. We hope our conversation helped normalize the struggles so many of us face on the path to success. While on the outside things often look like sunshine and rainbows, this is rarely the experience for anyone behind the facade.
But instead of letting that demotivate you, we hope it does the exact opposite. To let it fuel you to keep pursuing your purpose and realise your potential. Just without the added burden of feeling inadequate, and a little more patience, some tips, and self-compassion instead. For further info, head to our website, flourishingunfiltered.com, and get in touch with us via our socials, @flourishingunfiltered.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of loneliness, low mental health, or suicidal thoughts, please know that there are people who care and treatments that can help. We've compiled some helplines for you in the show notes. It's a wrap for Flourishing Unfiltered today. Please give us a follow and leave us a comment and a review. We hope you tune in next time.